Tallow. So hot right now. Having a moment. Everybody wants to talk about tallow. Today on Sawbones Barbecue, we're going to show you how to make it. You can certainly buy it if you want to keep it simple. Go on Amazon and have it shipped to your door. You can get, this is a tub of Wagyu tallow, 42 ounces, which I think goes for about 30 bucks. That's certainly an easy way to give it a go. But we're going to show you how to make it at home, which is actually surprisingly easy. So we'll get into that and we'll show you how to make this good stuff. It's kind of having a moment right now, tallow is, on the interwebs. It's maybe the next castor oil. Everybody's talking about its supposedly fantastic health benefits and making all kinds of outrageous claims. You know, it cures psoriasis, it erases gambling debts, it gets rid of parking tickets. People are making soaps and lotions and sunscreens.
But wait, there's more!
People are injecting it in their eyelids, they're rubbing it on their genitals, they're waxing their cars with it. I mean, just stuff that makes absolutely no sense. So I know nothing about that, but I do know how to make it for cooking purposes, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you want to make tallow at the simplest level, you need a full packer brisket that hasn't been trimmed yet and a sharp knife. That's it. With those two things, you're ready to make tallow. If you want to take it to the next level and kind of be a little bit more efficient about it, you would benefit from a meat grinder and an Instant Pot pressure cooker. Those are the two tools that I use to try to get the most out of it. A lot of what I learned on this, I learned from another barbecuer, Steve Gao at Smoke Trails Barbecue. He has some really nice videos on tallow, and he's been very nerdy and scientific about it and done spreadsheets to calculate the yields and the cooking times, and he's really gotten it down to a science. So I'm gonna kind of give you Cliff's notes with everything I've learned from Steve Gao and others and just cut right to the chase. If you got a brisket and you don't want to waste those trimmings and you want to make your own tallow at home, we're going to show you how to do it today. All right, so we're ready to trim. We've got a full packer here ready to go. I've got it fat side up and I'm going to trim. I separated the meat trimmings from the fat trimmings. The meat can be saved to grind up and make hamburger, do what you will. And then the fat trimmings is what we want to make our tallow. So I've kind of diced them down into little 1-inch cubes or so. And if you want to do this the low-tech way, you could be done. No meat grinder, no Instant Pot. You can just cook these chunks as they are. Grab a foil pan, throw the fat chunks in the pan and cook them. You can do it in the oven, you can do it on the smoker. It's very easy to do it kind of a low-tech way like that. Word of warning, if you're going to do it on the smoker, the fat really will absorb a lot of the smoke flavor. So it's going to be a very smoky barbecue flavored tallow. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're just using it for briskets or whatnot, then great. You can do it on the smoker in an open container and you will get a lot of smoke flavor. If you don't want that, if you're using it for everyday purposes like cooking eggs, cooking steaks on the stove, what have you, then you want to make sure your pan is covered if you're cooking it on a smoker. Or better yet, just cook it in the oven. You don't need the smoker if you're not trying to get that smoky flavor. So there are lots of ways to do it very low tech. The only downside of that really is you get a very poor yield. You're not going to get as much out of it. So if you want to optimize the yield, the kind of next level way to do it is to run it through a meat grinder and then to cook it under pressure in an Instant Pot. So if you happen to have these two appliances, then you're good to go. If not, they're good things to have for a variety of other purposes anyway. So we're going to do a coarse grind, and then we're going to do a fine grind, and then we're going to do 4 hours in the Instant Pot. I'm going to load up the meat grinder with some chunks of fat, and then we'll be ready to grind here. All right, so we've done one round of grinding with the coarse grinding plate, and we've got this product. It kind of looks, you know, much thicker than spaghetti, but it kind of comes out looking like pasta. It's still ice cold. One tip, it goes much better if you do this almost freezing cold. So if you're having a time gap in between sessions, you could stick it back in the freezer to keep it cold. You don't want it frozen solid, but you definitely don't want it room temp, or it tends to kind of gunk things up a little bit. So this is still pretty cold, so I'm going to go right ahead and do the fine grind now. So we'll set this aside, and now what I'm going to do is change out the plate from the coarse one to the finer one. And the point of grinding it down so much is to get more surface area so we get more yield out of our cook. So this is our finished product after we've gone through 2 rounds with the grinder. Now it's ground coarse. It kind of comes out looking like spaghetti more or less. And now this is ready to go into the Instant Pot. So depending on the size of your pressure cooker, you want to make sure you have enough room for water. So you don't want to fill the thing to the brim with fat. Generally, you need around 2 cups of water per pound of fat that you're putting in there, more or less. So if I put in 3 or 4 pounds of fat, I'm going to need 6 or 8 cups of water. I'm not super precise about it. I just use those ratios as a ballpark to make sure I have ample water in there so that it can cook. So we're going to get this fat loaded in the Instapot with some water, and then we'll cook it for 4 hours. Our batch of tallow has been cooking in the Instapot for about 4 hours, and it just finished. So the next thing we're going to do is vent it and let all the steam out. Let it sit for a little while before we try to open it, just to avoid burns. So we'll go ahead and open it up, and then we'll see what it does. Okay, so our inner container has come out of the Instapot. We've got the whole batch in here, which is basically the rendered fat sitting on top of the solid goo that we want to get rid of, on top of really piping hot water. And it takes about 4 or 5 minutes, but once it stops bubbling, it's probably safe enough to handle. So I just grabbed some gloves and some pot holders. And now what we're going to do to strain it is dump it from this pot into a second pot through a fairly fine mesh strainer. You don't want one that's too coarse, or the solids are going to get in there and kind of give you a less pure finished product. So you don't have to use like a cheesecloth per se, but I would recommend a very fine strainer. And we'll do a little bit of a pour, and then we'll let it sort out, and then we'll do kind of rinse and repeat till we go through the whole batch. So now I'm just pouring the stuff right into the strainer. And then when it fills up, I'll pause and kind of hit it with a spoon for a little while to just kind of tease the solids out of the way and let the liquid filter through. Usually takes me about 2 or 3 rounds of this to get everything separated. Okay, so we finished the straining process. That got rid of the majority of the solids out of there, almost all of it, with a nice fine strainer. And now what we're left with is a fat and water mixture, and we want to get rid of all the water. So conveniently enough, they're obviously going to separate just like a salad dressing would. The fat's going to sit on the top and the water's going to sit on the bottom. But at room temp, the fat is still going to stay mostly liquidy, so it's fairly difficult to separate it. If you wanted to, you could try taking like a turkey baster or something and trying to just carefully pull the fat off the top. That's good and bad. It's easy, but you're going to get a little bit of cross-contamination and end up with some water in your finished product. So what I found the best way to do is to go ahead and refrigerate it, because the tallow will be very much a solid at refrigerator temperatures, and of course the water will not. So you take your entire pot, stick it in the fridge once it's cool enough to sit on your fridge shelf, or put a trivet under it or something. Come back in a few hours, and then you're going to end up with a pot that looks like this, with a nice solid white fat disc on the top. And then you can simply take a butter knife or a rubber scraper, if you want to be nice to your pans, and just kind of poke around the edges and free up that disc of fat. Break it into chunks if you need to get it out. And then I generally will just give them a really gentle rinse under some warm water, or maybe even wipe them with a paper towel. And then take those big chunks and put them into a pan and melt them down gently back to a liquid. Then once the water's out and you have that liquid tallow, you can put it into whatever you want. I usually use like an old Chinese soup container for bulk storage, get a quart of it at a time in there. And then for daily use, I like these little condiment squirt bottles, so you can actually use it for your cooking. If you store it in the fridge, it's going to be a solid, so it certainly isn't going to squirt out of the bottle, but it'll be nicely preserved. So what you need to do then, if you want to be able to use this, is just put the bottle into some warm water, give it a few minutes, and soon enough it'll be a liquid again that you can squirt right out. So what I'll do a lot of times if I'm making a steak in the sous vide, once the steak is done and I'm ready to cook it, I'll just casually put the bottle on top of the sous vide, or even put it in there for a minute, and it'll very quickly melt. Then you can go back to the fridge for long-term storage. Can you store it out at room temperature? Yes, you can. But after a few weeks, maybe a month, it's going to start to go rancid or get mold on the edge of it. So I wouldn't recommend leaving it out for long-term storage, because it will eventually go bad. So if you're going to store it for a long period of time, definitely in the fridge, and then just allow some time to warm it up in warm water, and then it'll be ready to use. So that's our finished product. If you are worried about it being perfectly clean and free of any little flecks of brown or any leftovers from the cooking process, you can rinse and repeat. Just warm it up, run it through the strainer a second time, run it through a finer strainer like a cheesecloth. You can do it as many times as you like to further purify it. But for everyday cooking purposes, I find 1 round with a fine strainer is good enough, and that makes a very nice finished product. So next, we got to obviously take it for a test run. So we'll find a nice steak to cook and we'll get it going. So our tallow batch is done. And now I'm going to show kind of my favorite way to use it for everyday cooking. I use it to sear steaks. It's much better for high temperature cooking than other options, and it works very nicely. Conveniently enough, I have a Wagyu cowboy steak cooked and ready to go. This has been in the sous vide for about 4 hours, so it's done. But looking at it, the outside looks kind of nasty coming out of the sous vide. You definitely have to put a good crust on it, and tallow in a cast iron is my favorite way to do it. So I've got this pan going. We're just now to 400 degrees. So we'll get a little bit of sizzle when we put the tallow in, and then we'll start working on the steak. I put a generous amount in there, and then I put the steak in with nothing on it at first. All right, so before we flip it, I'm gonna just put a little bit of tallow on this side as well. When it's room temp like this, it comes out kind of semi-liquidy, which is perfect for putting a little drizzle on the steak. That's why I keep it in these condiment bottles. And if you store them in the fridge and they get solid, no problem. Just stick the bottle in the sous vide water when you're done cooking, and you'll be ready to go in just a minute or two. All right, so we're ready for a flip. That's gonna get a nice, beautiful crust on there. So with a steak this thick, I'll just do 2 minutes aside at different angles, put a little nice grill marks on it. Makes it look like it came off the grill even though it came off the stove. That's kind of fun. Now I'll let it rest for a couple minutes. We're ready to cut into this bad boy. All right, well, thanks very much for watching. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and follow us for our next video. And if you have any questions, comments, leave them down below and we'll get back to you.